Okay, I'll start over. We're opening our committee meeting now. This is Finance and Operations. And joining me here in council chambers is Councilor Wingard. And joining us remotely are Councilor Robertson, Councilor Gardner, and Councilor Grenier. Thank you for being here. And I see a short timer up there in the upper right-hand corner, Joe Madigan. I understand this might be the last time we will see you in your official capacity, so it's a pleasure to have you here. Okay, moving on to the agenda. First item on the agenda is non-union wage analysis and discussion. And I think Sophie and Zach are handling that information.
We are. I am gonna share my screen with you. I think Avi and I have figured this out as a way to everybody see that okay? All right. So this has been on the docket for a little while. Once again, I'm bringing Zach Turner, the Deputy Finance Manager and Payroll Specialist, in to help. He has done an awful lot of number crunching to make this work. So we are going to try to include him a little bit more in this discussion than we did last time. There is this presentation has 38 slides, some of which may be more important than others, but I want you to have it all. People who are joining remotely receive an email of a PDF with these slides in it, and people who are here will receive the packet of slides. Okay. So it's unusual for us to talk about pay scale and wages in the middle of a year. Normally, we would do that in the context of the budget process. So the first question I would expect council to have here is, why are we here having this discussion? So there are two primary reasons for that. The first is a shift in the labor market. We are seeing increasing demand for labor. It's creating smaller candidate pools. Those candidate pools have less qualified or experienced individuals in them. And those that are there, when we make job offers, are expecting significantly higher starting wages than they have in the past. That is also creating an increase in the time to fill, which is a barometer of how much time it takes from somebody leaving to us having somebody in there to fill the position. That is increasing our overtime costs. We're seeing that significantly in the public safety, which we talked about the last time we had a discussion. It's also decreasing productivity. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But having less people in a department means that you have less hours to be able to devote to things. And it's decreasing job satisfaction. One of the things we're seeing in the labor pool is a desire to really find that work-life balance. And we're seeing that in Orono, just as they talk about that with the as a national trend, that we've got a blinking light. We could hit these, that would be great. So we want to improve the job satisfaction. So the other reason that we're here is that we're seeing a very significant and sharp increase in the cost of living. So in FY20, we saw, or in 2019, we saw a consumer price index, all cities, New England, all cities, of 1.7%. We were in the middle of a pandemic, so we did not adjust the wage scale at that point. As part of our FY21 budget, or for calendar year 2020, we saw a CPI of 1.9%. And we gave a 2% adjustment to the wage scale at that point. Currently, this year, which would be the numbers from calendar year 2021 through the end of November. So they've not reported the end of December yet. We are at a CPI of 6.8%, and we're using the same New England all cities calculation. You'll notice that 2 weeks ago when we met, it was 6.4, so it increased by 0.4 from October to November. Making sense so far? So let's talk a little bit about the town of Orono. So Orono has a total of 80 employees. 35 of them are part of the unionized workforce, which is public safety for us. 45 are non-union. 20 of those 80 are exempt, which is Fair Labor Standards Act classification as exempt, meaning exempt from overtime or salary. And 60 of them are non-exempt, meaning they get paid an hourly rate times the number of hours they work, depending on whether they're unionized or non-unionized, fire or everybody else. It would be either 42 hours a week average or 40 hours a week total. Making sense so far? So the other thing, if I was thinking about our employees, I would want to know where are we in terms of our curve on the length of service, because the length of service tells you a lot of things. It tells you how much training you need to put in, what the likelihood of future turnover might be. People at the higher end of the years of service are probably going to be more likely to maybe be able to retire soon. In that 1 to 3 year span, we probably would see maybe more turnover, that the job maybe isn't what they expected, or they are not at a point where they have accrued significant benefits vested in the retirement system. So I would say on both the left hand and the right hand side of that curve are where you're looking at potentially expecting to lose more people. What is unusual for Orono is when you look at less than a year at 13 people. That is extremely high turnover for our organization. So let's talk about our organization. We have positions that have been created and managed to meet what the town council has established as the service level goals, right? So we are different than every other community in that we value, we have made certain value judgments, council has, and we allocate our resources to meet them. So the way we do it looks very different than the way Old Town has done it or other places have done it. We have significant budgetary constraints, and we talk about this all the time, that we have 50% of almost 50% of our valuation is not taxable. And we also at the same time, which gives us one of the lower values in Penobscot County. But on the other hand, we have a population that needs service that is the second highest population in all of Penobscot County. So those budgetary constraints have caused us to get very creative. We've limited the number of our employees and increased the workload or combined job functions, which on an annualized basis, that makes sense. It costs less to pay a person a little bit more to do a little bit more work than it does to go hire a whole new person. However, when it comes to trying to compare apples to apples, we aren't often in the same family. We're like trying to compare apples and oranges. So we need to recognize that when we look, for example, and as we go through the presentation, I'll point out, when we look at a deputy clerk as an example in Orono, that is a much different job than what a similar function would be in Old Town. And one of the things we're seeing is that our front desk people are deputy clerks, deputy treasurers, deputy tax collectors, and they're expected to have a much higher degree of knowledge than other places. So the smaller workforce also increases our expectations for people. We talked about cross-training. Also, higher performing staff, we need that higher performing staff to get the greater productivity that we expect out of a smaller workforce. We also have our small workforce also requires that everybody on staff have soft skills, as opposed to being able to hide people who might not have those soft skills. They have to have initiative. We don't have enough people to go around and make sure that people want to be doing their work and going what a lot of places term the extra mile is the expected mile in Orono. And we have people, everybody has to be able to work independently. So when we have turnover, given our system, those vacancies are straining the system. They increase the time that we're having to dedicate to recruitment and hiring. So that means that the town manager's office and department heads are really focusing an awful lot of time on how are we going to get people into this seat, as opposed to how are we going to plow that road or how are we going to write that grant. And because we don't have a dedicated human resources department or specialist, that all falls on the very same people that have the full workloads trying to get the work accomplished. It also means even when we found that great person who's going to do wonderful work for us, we're spending an awful lot of time onboarding and training folks. So we're looking at ways that we can decrease some of that time and find efficiencies. But it's a challenge again, because we have so much cross training and the town manager's office doing an awful lot of that work. We made that decision though. Several years ago, we decided that we were going to try to take technical efficiencies. It's still, with the level of turnover that we're seeing, is creating a real strain. And it is decreasing overall productivity as we have these vacancies and our ability to support higher functions. And by higher functions, one of those higher functions is town council, I'll be honest. So I'm always. So as we go through this presentation, you're going to see a lot of data has been collected. We didn't just use one data source, which is why at times it's presented in different ways. And as we go through that, I'll explain. But Zach is the data collector extraordinaire. He has been on the phone with our comparable communities within the region. For us right now, those comparables would be Old Town, Hamden, Brewer, and Bangor. And one of the things that's really interesting is hearing from them that they're in the exact same boat as we are, that they know their pay scales are off, they're having a hard time attracting people, they're having a hard time retaining people, and it's really straining their workforce. So when we compare, I need you to understand that those communities are at the very same time as we are doing this very exercise. I would suggest I have Zach, so mine's going to be superior to them all. But the other thing that we use, because some of our work is really based on population driving. So like, for example, the town planner and the economic development director, those in many ways, their job is a function of the size of the community that they're in. And so you'll see population peers at times. There will be times that you're just going to throw them out because our population peers are in Southern Maine. We don't have population peers up here. And our regional peers. So when you see the median min, median, and max, those are our regional peers. So those communities within the Bangor area. And in some cases where we have identified that we are truly in competition and trying to get people out of the private sector, we have looked at that in developing the pay scale, not in the comparables. Does that make sense? If I'm going too slow, let me know. So along with the external comparables, we also need to remember that our pay scale that we create has to have internal equity. And so by that, I mean, are we ranking people in a way that makes sense? What are the, so when I look at that, I'm trying to figure out what is the base knowledge and skills required to do this job. We're not talking about individual people when we talk about pay scales. We're talking about job descriptions and expectations for the job. Are there specific requirements regarding certification, licensure, educational attainment? Do we put requirements on that job that don't allow people to enjoy the same lifestyle that other people can enjoy? Meaning, are we requiring that they go long periods of time without being able to leave the area, or being able to have a glass of wine, or being able to be seen doing things that other people do? So are we controlling their behavior beyond the workday? Becomes kind of part of that job requirement. When we think about responsibilities, how many people are we expecting people to supervise? So when you look in the Public Works Department, we have leads who are supervising people. They have more responsibility than the people under them, which means that they should be placed higher on the pay scale than, or lower, depending on how you look at that, right? Do they have a regular business day or 24-hour operations? And that's primarily with management, but is this a department that at the end of the day, they go home and it's very unlikely that they're gonna have to worry about what's happening? Their department's closed, or they're not having to deal with operations. What is their level of independence, autonomy, and responsibility? What's their general workload? How much time are they expected to devote to the day? And some departments are, or department heads, by virtue of their job, are expected to be part of a higher executive function. That needs to be thought of. And unfortunately, the other piece that we always have to think about is what is the ability to replace this person? What's the cost to replace this person? So I'll give you an example. Town planners a planning position is usually seen in a larger community. A town planner in southern Maine is much easier to find than a town planner in northern Maine. When you find a town planner in northern Maine, you often have to put some kind of system in place to mentor or to help that person understand the job. That is costly. In Orono, a town planner would be a key position. We utilize a planner, I would say, more so than many communities of our size. So I am looking at public infrastructure first. I thought we'd just dig into what we're finding. Currently, you see the general job titles that we would have for the public infrastructure, and across it, you see the hourly rates. Our current pay scale, which I have not adjusted the general pay scale, other than cost of living increases since I've been here, you'll notice it's A, B prime, B, C prime. So I wanted you to understand it's not just duplicated numbers across. And the idea is we would hire somebody on step A or B prime, maybe B, depending on their skills and experience. There's nothing that is absolute with this pay scale.
Can you
Yep.
explain that just so nothing is absolute?
So when somebody comes in, if they're a laborer, they're going to be put on the laborer wage scale,
Right.
right? Range 23. If they have a lot of experience, or they carry a commercial driver's license, or, you know, they have demonstrated the ability to do the job before, they could come in anywhere from A to C prime
Gotcha.
on that wage scale.
They couldn't go further than that at a beginning salary.
I would have a really hard time justifying it, but I've justified things for Rob in the past that have made sense. He makes pretty good arguments, but generally, I wouldn't expect to see them much past the third or fourth step.
I'm still a little confused on the primes.
So if you notice, there's a little dot
Oh, I see them.
above. So I don't know why. I think this is a holdover from Annie Brown. Instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think maybe it got too, you didn't want to use too many letters of the alphabet because it seemed too long. I would agree that I think this pay scale is too long. And you'll see as I'm proposing kind of a new one or a new idea down.
In the current scheme, is there any planned progression between columns, or is it dependent upon each person?
So when they come in, usually there are 3 benchmarks that are identified. If they come in as unskilled or without the certifications, so I'll use the laborer as an example. If they start on A, we probably would be looking at a 6-month review, successful completion of probation, which would get you to B, and then an annual, a 1-year step to B, which gets you to B prime and then to B at 1 year. Usually, once you get past certifications, licensure that's required, or clearly identified steps, benchmarks that people need to meet, or 1 year, however it kind of settles out, they're usually in that place for a while. And unlike the union pay scale, where it's time in the seat gets you another step, that is not how we do it here. It is truly based on merit. How is that person performing? The issue that we've had, especially in our public infrastructure, is we have been shifting quickly down the range because the market has been falling away from us. You know, when I came on board, a laborer coming in with no particular skills and ability would be paid more like $10, $11 an hour. So we really had to bring that up just to get people. So
if you're an ambitious laborer, your best bet is to become an operator or a lead. And puts us in a deficit. Okay.
So I would say reasonably, somebody would expect to take even a very ambitious, high performer. On this pay scale, you're looking at 6 or 7 years before you're going to get, even if you were a rock star. If you notice, one of the things that has gotten us in the past too is you have a wonderful laborer who is, let's just say, on C in that range, goes out, gets the CDL, they get the CDL, and there's an open operator position, so they want to move into that. I am now with this wage scale having to look at, oh wait, we got to go to C prime or C because I got to give you a raise to do that. So the way this wage scale is compressed does not make sense when we manage it.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Cheryl has her hand up.
Oh, I had a question. First, can I get Jeff to get just a little bit closer to the owl? Because he's really muffled when he's talking. I can't hear him. I don't know about other people on
Sure. Yeah, I'll try that, Cheryl.
Yeah, I can't hear what you're saying. Sophie, I just had a question, just a quick question, and it may be a moot point, but do people ever come in applying for a job and say, oh, well, I made such and such at this job, and this is what I expect now, depending on
So we see
whatever they've been
that.
hired for? Yeah,
So by the time you get into the leads, those are internal promotions. I can't imagine that we would hire somebody as a lead. Is that fair? Not likely not gonna happen. So when we look at laborers, most of the time, we're bringing in laborers who have no experience. When we hire an operator, either in WPCF or in Public Works, we are often trying to bring somebody in who has some technical ability. It's always great to see the ones that have commercial driver's licenses and experience in the field. But when they say to us, I'm a wastewater operator and I want to make $24 an hour, which is one of the things that we've heard, or Rob offered the job, the equipment operator job that we finally pulled and reclassified for this year. He offered that to two. Yeah, 3 skilled people who wanted, what they wanted was off the pay scale. There are times that we can look at it and say, wow, the benefit you give us would cause us to bring you in higher, like that C prime. But that's really hard for us to do, simply because we have incredibly skilled, dedicated employees, and it's who have been with us for a few, up from a few years to many years. It's not fair to bring somebody in at such a compressed value to them. And so we've held the line on that, which is part of the reason why I think we really need to look at pay scale. I'm gonna move
Thank you,
on.
Sophie.
Yep.
So next, what you're gonna see is our research, and then I'm gonna share with you a draft proposed pay scale. I'm not asking you to agree to it today. I'm just telling you where I think we need to be. So this is the same kind of setup as we looked at 2 weeks ago. That long dash dot is Orono's pay scale. The top line, the red line on the top, is Bangor, then Hamden behind it, MMA salary survey behind that. I'm sorry, not Hamden grade, a grade up, right? Okay, covered. Yeah, Hamden grade 8. And then Hamden grade 6 below that, and Brewer under that. So we know from talking to the city of Brewer that they are pretty aggressively looking at changing their pay scale. We know that the comparison here is a little off. And what I'd like Zach to talk about very briefly is, as he collected this data, especially in this data set, what did you run into?
The main problem I ran into is that everybody likes to classify their people differently. A laborer for us is very different from a laborer for Bangor or for Brewer. We have a few different grades. Some of them had 5 or 6 different levels for their laborers, and I feel like they probably have more specialized roles. And in reaching out to all the different towns and getting, they manage their pay scale differently. They classify their employees differently. And, like each community, we're all unique in how we manage our people.
So as an example, if you're a laborer in Orono, you're expected to be a light equipment operator. You're expected to be able to operate everything that you don't need a commercial driver's license for. So that is a little bit different than somebody who is simply on the business end of a shovel. But at the same time, you need to be able to be on the business end of a shovel. Sense? I'm going to continue to kind of work through this. So we did the same thing as we did last time, where we tried to not muddy the waters. If you look, we have our comparative average. What's the x-axis? Steps across.
So that's like the A, B prime. B.
Yep.
But it's not labeled because there's so many different names.
Yep, they're all classified with different names, either, numbered steps, lettered steps, numbered
Right.
letter steps.
So
It's
it's not
a-
necessarily time in employment or.
Mm-mm.
Okay.
No, we're working, Zach, through this, Zach is looking at their minimum and maximum on the pay scale.
Yep.
So the orange small dots are our comparable averages. The long red dots or slashes are the average at the comp average with a 3.2% raise. Orono is again that long dash dot. And then the green line is with a 3.2% raise, and the above line is with a 6.4% raise. That, instead of changing the 6.4 to 6.8 to represent where the CPI is right now, we kept it at 6.4 because we wanted it to be comparable with public safety. Jeff, you look like you're thinking.
I am thinking, but that's okay. Keep going.
Okay. Everybody else is all right? So we did the same thing with a facilities operator. And I don't know that you need me to go through each and every piece here, other than to kind of try to share and illustrate that we're pretty low. And there's facilities with the raises again. So our WPCF laborer would be an individual who does not have licensure for the plant. We do not require everybody to attain a grade 4 license to be an operator. If you have a 1-2, we consider you an operator, and then you go across. WPCF folks, especially operators, can go across the scale faster than public works folks because of the opportunities to obtain certification and licensure, which usually will create a step. So you're going to see a scale like this quite often. And when you look at that, you're going to want to look for the red stop sign. That will always be Orono on the scale. But showing you, this is an operator, not a laborer. And when you look at this, it's also averaged in our leads who are also operators.
On that slide, minimum hourly, the green, is that the
Yeah.
green dot? What's
Yeah.
that?
So, oh, go ahead.
So on this one, the minimum, the mid, and the max, those are from the MMA salary survey. Unfortunately, for some of the departments, I couldn't get the nice pay scales to compare each other to. So I tried to mark those ones out. Those are the MMA calculates that based on our regional comparables.
So
Yeah.
again, whoops.
I'm sorry. Can you just explain why we have Old Town in the WPCF labor, but we didn't include Old Town as a comparable as some of our other jobs?
It really depends on the data that they provided. So in some spots, they didn't provide a rate, and I can plug it in if I didn't have the number.
That makes,
I just want to make sure I wasn't
Yep.
missing
Yep,
stuff.
I think you'll see that on some of these other charts too. For example, like I used on the bottom, those are some of our population-based comparables. And some of these positions didn't list information, so our population-based comparables might have changed a little bit on each of these graphs as well.
So let me ask the question, see if I understand the chart correctly.
Okay.
Is this chart telling me that if we look at the MMA salary data on the mid hourly rate, that Orono's current salary in the mid-range is comparable to the MMA data?
Yes.
for a laborer. So I want to go back and double check that one to make sure that you're comparing operators to operators.
Yes, I will check that.
So we're gonna double check that, to
Okay.
make sure we've got operator for operator. Because what we're seeing, so the MMA salary data is also essentially 18 months behind where we are right now. It is a lag indicator as opposed to what is expected
Sure.
ahead. And again, that same chart. So again, just to give you a sense of what, based on what we're hearing and seeing, let me just. When I look at public infrastructure, I look at trying to create a pay scale that very clearly identifies entry level. E1 meaning don't have a lot of skills or experience. E2 meaning, especially with public infrastructure, maybe you have a CDL and not much experience, or if you have experience and a commercial driver's license, then maybe you're at E3. If you have experience, a commercial driver's license, and the credentials to be an operator, maybe you're at step A, because you fulfilled all of the conditions of employment. When we look at this, it compresses the pay scale a little bit to make it a little bit easier to manage. And I think it gives a reasonable gap between the value of coming in and after 5 years. It also allows us to place, for example, a supervisor, which a lead in either department would be a supervisor, to clearly have a spread between the people that they're supervising. Okay? And I'm not, you notice it's proposed draft because I'm not even ready to really propose the pay scale, but it gives you a sense of where I think the market tells us we should be. So instead of having everybody on one pay scale, I am proposing that we're going to break our pay scale up. And we started to do that last year when we created an administrative professional support pay scale for our hourly folks. And this is currently what that pay scale is. Our administrative professional support encompasses a lot of different types of activities. It includes our library staff, hourly library staff, community development, hourly staff. It would include our hourly parks and recreation people, the front desk people, our public safety admin support, our finance department, bookkeeper, hourly people, and it would include in my office, Nancy would be part of that. And what we've tried to do is, once again, delineate by responsibility, autonomy, independence, level of expectations, and the complexity of the tasks that they're expected to take on. So, for example, clerical staff, things should be pretty well laid out for that person to be able to manage that. It also includes, they're not administrative, but they're professional. It would include our summer lifeguards if we were to bring them back on as employees as opposed to contract. An administrative assistant would be doing the things you would expect. There's a little bit of autonomy there. They have to be able to answer the phone, maybe write letters, help move the work forward. The specialist position is one that is more like project management or a higher level of independence and expectations. So this is where our bookkeeper lives, as an example, on this line. And our support specialists for public safety live in this line. Our clerks live in this line. And the executive assistant is expected to likely have a lot of program responsibility. So when we look at, we have an executive assistant right now in this pay scale who is responsible for projects and managing crises, managing onboarding, doing, work like that. So this is the existing pay scale. So I will tell you, we ran into some significant issues when we tried to compare our deputy clerks, and I alluded to that before. In many communities, you would have a clerk responsible for taking excise tax, a clerk responsible for taking sewer and tax payments, a clerk responsible for doing vital records or elections. We have 2 deputies and the clerk, and they are doing all of that. So we have said fewer people managing the workload. We've managed the workload around trying to go more electronic, web-based services. We've managed the workload by moving to a 4-day work week so that we can try to get people in at various times and have an extra day if we need to. When I look at this number, it is very clear, and Zach can speak to it, that it was all over the map.
It really was. There's just so many different specialties that people are classified as on the MMA survey and on their own scales. For just clerks alone, there's probably 3 or 4 different ones listed on the MMA survey. And it's very difficult when ours covers such a broad spectrum to kind of match our apples to our apples versus our apples to our mangoes.
I like mangoes. So again, this just kind of shows you, if you look at where we are in that scale right now, our clerks are at the lower end of that scale because of tenure right now and budgetary constraints. But this is a place where, comparing to the private sector, which I realize is different, or even somebody being able to go, we had somebody recently have a position open, a clerk position open, doing about 60% of the breadth of work, starting at $22 an hour in a regional area. Library.
So
Oh, go ahead.
I'm looking at the deputy clerk graph.
Yep.
Making sure I understand it correctly. When you go to the 3rd grade,
Yep.
grade 3, is that right? Grade 3?
So-
Although our salary looks higher than the others, we think that is in part because of the way people are classified in other areas.
The way that they're classified and the fact that for our clerks, they are handling elections, excise, the entire leave process. They're doing a body of work that is unusual within this size community. You would normally see that body of work in a town of, let's say 1,500 people. That's library specialist would be our youth services librarian, our circulation manager, essentially our full-time program related individuals. When we look at this, we see that Orono isn't quite up to mid-hourly. When we look at our comparables, we are significantly under within the region. However, I would say this is another one of those places that's really hard because they assign it an hourly rate, but it might be an hourly rate for 20 hours or an hourly rate for more. We see another time when people call things different. And some of these could actually be more like librarians, which is a totally different pay scale for us. So as you see, we're kind of in the between the min and the mid. So our finance department is truly an unusual setup. In our region, I am the only manager that also serves as the finance director, which creates an issue. We in this department handle all of the payroll as well as Zach has been learning how to do the onboarding, so we're trying to take some of that work. So we have a supervisor in the department because me trying to supervise the day-to-day work would not work. And then we have the deputy finance manager who also is a payroll specialist. And then we have a bookkeeper who is part-time. And I think this is the one that created the most challenge for Zach overall, simply because they're highly professional, skilled positions, but they are truly not what everybody else is doing. So the proposed pay scale looks to increase from what we had before, but also add in that idea of an E1, E2, meaning as you come, if you're not really ready, you don't really meet all the conditions of the job, you would kind of start a little bit lower on the pay scale, but somebody that's coming in, it gives a little bit more ability to stretch the pay scale if we needed to get a highly qualified individual.
Sophie, can I ask you a question?
Many
Yeah.
as you'd like.
All of the steps, and maybe you have said this and I was just spacing out and didn't quite get it, but how does an employee who works on a step program like this, how often do they progress a step, or what does it take before they progress a step? Is it yearly? Is it by experience, like you've been talking about different kinds of certifications? Is it every 5 years? How do you progress a step in our town?
There are a few different ways you can progress a step. When you're hired, you usually have anywhere between 2 and 3 steps outlined for you based on benchmarks, milestones. So every individual who's hired into the public sector is expected to serve a probationary period. It depends on whether you're doing it for police, fire, or any other department in town, the length of that. There are usually benchmarks around specific types of training. A lot of times, we're not hiring people with municipal experience, so we're having to get and wait for people to get other kinds of training. So we'll benchmark that. If you get that training, you'll go up a step. And then oftentimes we'll do at the end of a year. If you're still here at the end of the year and you get a satisfactory performance review, you can go up a step. Beyond that, it is one of two ways. The first way would be because your merit indicates, and usually we would talk about that every 2 or 3 years unless there was some compelling reason to talk about it sooner than that. Or the place that, especially with Public Works and WPCF, if we've had to change an entry point on the pay scale in order to be able to get a qualified person, then we'll come and talk about moving up steps, because we can't bring people on with no experience in the town at the same rate as somebody's been here for 3 years. That's not fair.
Other questions from our remote folks? Anybody? Sophie, I'm having a little trouble making the transition from the finance current ranges to the administrative professional support hourly
Yep.
proposed scale.
So if you look at that, for example, I would put our bookkeeper on as a specialist. And I would put our deputy finance director as an executive on there. That, to put them on the same pay scale.
So it looks like currently the deputy finance director is finance manager.
Deputy finance manager is at about 2262.
I'm sorry.
So I think you're gonna find that he is off the scale right now. We brought him in. He is 2254, which is the closest. I don't know, when we offered him his promotion, I think I rounded the number. So he would be range 29A. So, and I'm not suggesting it's all gonna get here in one chunk, I'm just what I think the market would tell me. So then we run into this idea of the senior staff or our salaried, highly salaried technical positions. And a few years ago, we created this senior staff, salaried senior staff pay scale. And we created kind of 2 career levels for department heads, and then we created this deputy pay range. And some of the people were a little bit off that because they had a skill set and benefits that were a particular benefit. They had licenses or certification of particular benefit. So we've got some stars in there as well. But that is kind of the scale that was there. What's important to note is that everybody in the first 2 rows are contract employees. So the salary range is kind of a bench, kind of a goal. Oftentimes raises or other issues will kind of play a role in that, because it's the total compensation within a contract. So we look at what are we expecting? Are there things that you are foregoing? Are there extra things you're getting within the contract? So our clerk is a salaried individual, and this is an individual that you look at our comparables, and she looks like she is very, very, very highly paid. I would say that most clerks that we're comparing her to get to do vital records and elections and don't have to worry about any of the other things that are coming in over the desk that ours does. Same kind of idea. Planner, you see our planner is under what we would expect to pay. He is going on to a contract, and we're going to talk about that in either January or February, but if you look there, it's definitely a place we need to look. Code enforcement, I think, is in the same place. I think these can be cleaner. The other ones might give you more information, but these charts, I think. are good. Economic development, you will see that in our region, we are significantly under where everybody else is with economic development.
Yeah, can I ask you
Yeah.
a question about the comparison to Brewer, which has 2 people in their economic development office?
Sure.
Is that a couple issue of both of their salaries, or is this, so it's 2 people making that much more than our current economic?
No, it would just be the director, so
Oh,
that,
okay.
that
It
was,
was director to director.
and let's be fair, with that director, I knew her as a seasoned economic development expert when I was in Dover Fox, when I was in Piscataquis County. On the same note, they only are doing economic development. In our department, our economic development director also is overseeing code, planning, assessing, and parks and rec. So that just,
Oh,
that's what we're trying, it's a lovely fruit salad.
So.
Yep.
Sorry to keep
No,
asking.
no, if I'm not,
So we're talking about department heads who are in salary ranges.
yes,
And let's take, for example, the economic development director.
yep,
That's not in the senior staff salary range category.
so it would be the community development director,
Okay, it is, yeah, I see,
and that would be 72 to 88.
okay. But then you, to get the hourly rate, you just took that, whatever that salary is, to
And divided it by 2,080 gives a base,
40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year.
even though we certainly expect him to work more than that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, double.
Let me just get back where we were. Library director. I would, the caveat with this one is that our current library director has 36 years, Lori. So 36 years of service with the town, so we'd expect that to be up. I would also argue that in Orono, library services is one of our core services, unlike other communities where it might be seen as ancillary. And our library director is also a critical member of our executive planning and operations team, which I think in many communities, that's not the case. So that's the fruit salad in this one, is that we have somebody with a huge amount of skill set. We had a different library director come in, I think you would see that salary come back down a little
We
bit.
don't want a different library director.
No, we like the one we have very much. And again, the rationale, and I'm also demonstrating here that I don't just give you I'm not just giving you the data that says that we are always at the low end. I would argue that where we are with our library director should be more in keeping with some of those core positions and what we're expecting in terms of relationship. Public Works Director. So after the library director's service, our Public Works Director is our second longest tenured department. First or second? Second.
Department head?
Yeah, first. That's all right. And also serves that executive function and oversees economic development. I'm sorry, solid waste, general public work, winter maintenance, cemeteries, facilities, environmental study, environmental services. So again, we put an awful lot in that bucket. And there you see just about mid. WPCF superintendent. So this is an individual who is leaving just now with 31 years of experience, so you'd expect that he is on the upper end of the pay scale for the position. Our assistant town manager. Want to talk a little bit about the fund you have trying to compare assistant town managers?
Assistant town managers seem to have a very wide range, not only on the pay scale, but if you dig nice and deep into the MMA salary survey, there's a section where it lists like additional titles and notes and everything, and there's a lot of assistant managers that have either no notes or a very long list of notes on additional, titles and responsibilities that they have. So it was definitely interesting to go in and try and match everything up. I ended up running with our regional comparables for the mid, and max, just to kind of give us an idea of where we sit.
To kind of get on a more function basis. So it seems like assistant town managers tend to do what the managers don't do. In this case, our assistant manager is our director of IT, our director of administration, which is all of the front office work. The clerk reports to the assistant manager. Running all of the director of the communications effort, so websites and social media, and also the director of our risk management program. So it is along with all of the duties as assigned, which can be varied. So when I look at the ranges, I think that the salary, we need to take some steps on the salary side. Our salaried people are bearing a lot of that burden of also being able to do operations and step in and run their departments. So when I look at highly technical professional people, I am not looking for, well, let me start by saying, I am not looking for an individual to come in on this range and run the range like we do hourly folks. I am looking, these are people who are on contract. I'm looking to be within the bounds of that. So when I look at my clerk, my finance manager, my planner, my code officer, they are highly technical, professional individuals that have a wide range of skills, abilities, and I think it really depends on the workload and the responsibilities within their department. Department head 2, and it's the one piece of paper I didn't bring with me. So when I look at that, in range 1, I would look at the finance manager, the facilities manager, the parks and rec manager, my public works foreman, my town clerk, my code officer, my fire inspector / community development person, my IT person, my planner, my graphics design and media person, and my environmental specialist to live within that range. The next one up, I would expect my library director, my WPCF superintendent, and my rec director, if I had a rec director, to live there. The next is a little bit new because we've changed the structure of public safety, but that is where the deputy police chief and deputy fire chief would live within that pay scale. And my department head 3 would be the assistant town manager, public works director, public safety director, and director of community development. So that's where I think,
So you said 3, I think, did you mean 4?
I'm sorry, yeah, department head 3, which is on level 4. So part of that exercise is to show you that I don't think we're ready to adopt a new pay scale right now for a couple of reasons. The first is that we're still trying to talk through comparables with our comparable communities. They're all doing the same exercise we're doing, and I think it would be important to see kind of where they land, where we all land, and it might be that all of the finance/HR people need to get together in a room and have a conversation, because I don't think anybody wants to publish first. But I do also think that what we've demonstrated is we are under the current market by and large. And that with the pressure that our people are facing, much like the conversation that we had last week, I am asking the town council to consider mid-year adjustment. And I think the fair way of doing that would be to look at a percentage across the board for that. I have kind of lived in that 3.2% simply because that's what we had talked about before. And again, I think equity is important. At 3.2% for a full year, so 12 full months, is $72,604.47. For the remainder of this year, it would be $36,302.23.
And that's all the positions that we talked about this evening. So all the employees, except public safety and the town manager, because we
Yes.
haven't talked about that position.
We have not.
And we need to look at the same information for that position.
I have that and I will get that to you. So based on everything that we've talked about, we would be looking at needing to do a budget adjustment if we went with 3.2 across the board, plus the other things that we talked about. The budget adjustment would be a total of $68,065.
And that's the 3.2 for everybody we talked about tonight, plus the public safety we talked about the last meeting,
Yes.
not the bonus that is
No.
coming from other money.
So, if you wanted to do a bonus, I got those numbers.
Okay, reaction, comments. Looking at my screen. Any,
It's a lot,
Lori.
it's a lot to take in. It's just a lot to kind of think about. One of the things that I was just kind of looking at the scales is really, it's not that, I mean, the leaps seem big, but when you look at, sometimes it's just a matter of 50 cents or $1 to just bump it up just that much. And that doesn't seem like that's that much to me. I'm not really sure where the money is going to come from. I don't know how that plays out, but I'm willing to listen because I think it's worthy. I think we do need to be competitive, and people need to survive, and so I'm for it. It's just so hard to respond to all at once.
yeah,
So I want to thank you for the analysis, for going through all of those many different classifications to try to see, so you can compare best these other towns to our town. I appreciate you doing the hold back until you hear from other communities. And yet I think that I'm pleased to see how detail oriented you are and how focused you are on trying to make this a just process. And I don't think we should be embarrassed about that. And I'm comfortable with Orono being a leader, because sometimes people are waiting for someone who's done the homework to say, we figured it out and here's, we're gonna put our toes in. So I was trained in the world of family hold back, like and let other people go forward. But in this case, I think that you've done a lot of important work and you thought about it a lot. And the only thing I didn't hear you mention that, we just had our justice, equity, diversity, inclusion training. And my recollection from being a supervisor in workplaces where there were traditionally gendered jobs, that embedded in that system, even though you're reevaluating the system, still you're reevaluating these titles that we know have had some gendered history. So we might have someone in the office that's wearing all these hats, and you compare them to other people in other offices wearing those hats, and yet the amount of training and time served that they have might be equivalent to someone who's working in another field like WPCF, and they're actually getting paid more per hour. Maybe they don't have to have a degree, a 4-year degree, and the people that are working in our offices tend to have 4-year degrees. So I don't know. You didn't mention anything about the gender issue, but I want to hear about that.
So I think I tried to with library, because library is most definitely a gender impacted field, that tends to be suppressed because wages, it's traditionally a female dominated field. So when we look at jobs, we go through all of those things that I talked about in that first slide, right? Like, what is it and what's necessary? And we also look at job conditions. And in some of that, Lori, for example, we hear from time to time, oh, it must be nice to be a firefighter and be able to sleep and get paid. And the fact of the matter is that firefighters get woken up an awful lot to run out into the freezing cold or the rain into the burning building, right? Or for that EMS call. So there's some amount of difference that is created by market demand. What I tried to do, especially in the administrative field, meaning administration is kind of very similar, even if you're a Parks and Rec programmer versus a bookkeeper. They're different, but they have some general similarities. That's how I tried to slate people on this list. And there is no way to get absolute parity within jobs, simply because part of the issue is demand and ability to train. And that has to be considered. The working conditions that you're working under have to be considered. And it just so happens that you've got to rely at some point of, if you wanted to have the conditions and the pay that a firefighter gets, then you have to be a firefighter. And there is no gender issue there. Anybody can be a firefighter. One of the things that when you talk about diversity that you need to consider with our current wage scale is that Northern Maine tends to be more homogeneous than Southern Maine does. So we are trying to compete. For example, in the fire department, we are relaxing our residency requirements so that we can get people perhaps from Southern Maine to come up in hopes of opening the potential candidate pool for a more diverse workforce. We are going to pay for that because they are two different labor markets. And fire department, that kind of makes sense because you come in for 24 hours once every 4 days. Having to travel might make some sense for that. Public works, it's very hard because you got to be local and be able to respond. So I think there are all sorts of different ways to look at it. I have tried to balance, not based on historically, but also looking at across the board what is this relationship to the rest of our departments? And try to come up with some clarity there.
I do appreciate the point, Lori, because I think it's important that we keep that in mind as we look at these salary adjustments. I was just reading an article, I think it was in the New York Times recently, about the career earnings of a female doctor, MD, who is trained exactly the same and has the same responsibilities as the male doctor. And over a lifetime of earnings, there's $5 million difference.
Right, so yeah, so I think you've done an incredibly thorough job, and that's why I'd be pleased as a finance committee member to see Orono lead and say, we've done our homework and here's what we think. So I wasn't talking about police and fire because they have a union contract, so I was really talking, I did mention WPCF just from a, and that would be another way to lead. And yes, I know anytime I'm suggesting this, it would cost us more money, but when we compare to other towns, they're all still in the same culture we are, which is the culture that, you know, that Tom was just citing, that we have allowed this, a shrinkage of the remuneration based on gender. And the only way we're going to be able to adjust that, besides, you know, doing these comparisons after the fact, or like, you know, the career ending thing, is to try to figure out how to align. And you're right, the part of it is what people expect they'll be able to get. And but wouldn't it be wonderful if I'm correct in saying that someone in WPCF has to have incredible skills and work well with others and be out in this in challenging situation, and yet can be trained on the job and doesn't require to have a college degree, and someone who can work in a more clerical task to get that job might end up having to have a no. Okay.
So a lot like our front desk people, that's all on the job training. And every once in a while, we pick somebody up with a degree. Every once in a while. I think when you look at our library services, those folks have to have we expect our director to have a master's degree, which is part of the reason why we pay accordingly, because there are very few people that we expect that of. So yeah, I think I hear what you're saying, and I think intuition, if you don't necessarily understand what's job related, what's not, you know, like our planner is significantly underpaid because he is expected to have advanced degrees in advanced learning. But that's, I would argue, not the only barometer.
Any other comments from council tonight?
Yeah, I actually have, I wanted to wait and to see if certain things that I was kind of thinking about in my own mind, if it was being mentioned before I spoke. I was curious that at the beginning when we talked about we were going to be comparing communities like Bangor, Brewer, Hampden, Old Town, that as we went through certain slides, it kind of moved to comparisons of Southern Maine, like the library specialist was Cape Elizabeth and Falmouth, and then Kittery shows up, Wells shows up. I was kind of curious why, and you wouldn't see Hampden in there for a couple different things. So I'd be curious why that happened.
So
Go ahead.
So Zach had two comparable groups, one which were on the smaller slides and that we had pay scales for were our regional comparatives. The other ones, when you saw the other communities in Southern Maine, those were population comparatives. And so when I look mostly around the planner, quite frankly, that is a position that the workload and expectations are driven a lot by population and complexity that comes with greater population. And then it just looked like a really cool slide, Terry, and why change, right?
Right. My second question is, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I find this that even in most businesses or people who are searching for other individuals, why wasn't benefits brought into this? Because you can find sometimes that you may be $2, $3 less, but your benefits are like amazingly better. Why is that not factored into this discussion?
So, for two things. First, when we're talking about municipality to municipality, one of the things that I asked Zach to look at were benefits, and municipal benefits are pretty standard. They're pretty flat, especially when you're talking about this region or our population comparative. So if A is the same in both places, I think we can factor it out because it is a very similar benefit package. When we looked at the public works, public infrastructure scale, we did look to the private sector for some of that information simply because that's where we're trying to attract people. But that is not influencing the scale to the degree that you would think, because when we look at even municipal comparables, where people are and the type of people that we want, I think those scales are really reflecting what people are demanding for those positions. And then the second reason, not right, not wrong. In fact, when we compare community to community, that we are generally very similar in benefits. But one of the issues we're running into with the new hires, they tend to be younger and they tend not to care about benefits, even though we have to give them. And even though if we try to change them, our longer tenured individuals would not be happy at all and see it as a massive cut in their compensation. But when we're trying to bring people on, I don't know if it means that we should need to compress the wage scale, or I don't think so. But that is one of the things we're hearing pretty routinely, wouldn't you say? So that's why I didn't weight the private sector as heavily, and all of your charts are only comparing municipal to municipal. But I do think it's important for us to understand that at least when we're first trying to attract people, I don't think they see the value in the benefits that I see. And as an organization, we really need to have a good retirement plan so that when it's time for people to retire, they do. We need to have a good health insurance plan so that when people get sick, they go to the doctor. You know, it all benefits us, but you're right, that's about an $8 an hour benefit. But it's about an $8 an hour benefit across the board.
Good. And I just have one more question. Given, I agree with you about starting at a point and the 3.2%. Are you thinking that this is just a general stroke of a pen across the board for everybody? Because as you were talking about that, like I said, I agree that we need to be on par, but I also felt that there will be those individuals within our community that work for the town that are better than a 3.2 at this point, simply because they have a higher workload. They're obviously maybe outperforming others, and so I don't know what you thought about that.
So I think the time to address high performers is during the budget season when we budget for merit increases. I totally agree with you. But I also will tell you that we're very fortunate because I have a whole lot of very high performers, and it would be hard for me to pick out even 20 that are the highest at this moment in time. Everybody is stretched and working really, really hard, most everybody. So when I looked at this, I think there's a lot of room. If we could have afforded a higher percent, then I might have come back and suggested flat rates or some other methodology. But right now, I think half of what the cost of living was back in November makes a start. And somebody mentioned, but then quickly ran away from, how are we gonna pay for this? And as we discussed 2 weeks ago, the place that I would suggest we pay for this is a budget adjustment out of the overlay account. We had more money budgeted there than it appears we're gonna be using this year. And it seems to me like a soft way to essentially say, take it from fund balance, because otherwise it would have lapsed to fund balance.
So if we were far enough along in the abatement process, things after the reevaluation to feel comfortable with that amount coming out of overlay.
I think so. We have 2.5 months left in the abatement window. We have not heard what I would expect to, like I haven't heard from any large people, and normally they would be knocking on the door a little bit, or we would have heard that they had put out mass abatement requests, like we did with Brookfield a year ago. Not hearing any of that. So far, I think we've utilized less than $30,000. So we still have a considerable amount of money.
And we originally budgeted in that account
260.
260. I'm supportive of a 3.2% increase for employees as we continue to look at the wage scale and look at how we might implement a new wage scale in the coming year.
I think it would be important for us to revisit the wage scale and how to implement it, and try to reach some decisions before the end of February so that I can build that into the budget.
Makes sense.
So it's not a after the fact.
Megan?
Sorry, just trying to find a spot. I'm supportive of this initial measure. I want to pour through this presentation a little bit more. I just wanted to say more in philosophical terms. When I look at compensation, my values are my values and not necessarily town councils or the towns or the organization, but just to kind of put it out there. When I think about compensation, I like to think about ethical compensation. And I know that a lot of the times when you have pressures, you're trying to balance pressures from taxpayers and balancing a budget and setting a tax rate. There's a when you're holding side by side, what are other communities paying and what is the cost of living? A lot of times I feel like in municipal government, there's a tendency to lean more towards, well, what are other towns paying? What are the comps? And to me, I understand, that is very capitalist. That's very like, well, what can you get for X amount of dollars? That's what that person is worth. But more and more, I think it's important to really take into consideration, not just the cost of living, but what is a living wage and what is the quality of life for the people that work for you. And I know that that's not always going to be a popular answer for taxpayers because that probably means more than they would like to pay if they're just looking at comps and saying, well, what I'm saying is I don't ever, as someone sitting on this council, I don't ever want to look at this process as kind of like, what can we get away with and be competitive? But rather, and I'm not suggesting anyone is saying that, but for me personally, I really want to be coming at this as we look more into it, in the coming months, as, what is the quality of life for our employees and what is a fair and just wage for them, and not really narrowing the focus on, well, where do we balance out with other communities nearby? That information is important, but I want to make sure that we don't lean too heavily on that as we go through this process. That is just my 2 cents, though.
Yep. Any other comments? I think you've heard support for the 3.2% as we continue to look at the wage scale. So I would assume we might see something in the near future at a regular council meeting in regard to that.
Yeah, what I will do is ask Zachary to come up with the calculations for each department, and it will be a budget adjustment to facilitate a 3.2%.
Is,
wage increase.
will that number include an estimate of the unfilled positions? If we were to fill like all the unfilled positions, just so we know.
Yeah, and I want to double check to make sure that we've got good estimates, because we have significant unfilled positions right now. But yes, the budget would accommodate that. But it also is going to look at the other calculation he needs to do for me, for example, in the police department, is how much do I really need to transfer, because we've been down 4 people for months. So we'll kind of work through that.
Zach, we appreciate all the work you've done on this project.
It was my pleasure.
I will tell you, he definitely has a knack for analytics. He's very good at
I
it.
like that. I like that. We ready to move on?
I am.
So let's go to an update on regional climate action planning effort.
So I actually have 2 things to kind of update you on here. The first is, so the town of Orono continues to work with the city of Bangor Area Comprehensive Transportation System, and Josh Rosen, who is a consultant from Southern Maine. VAX, we've discovered that VAX has some money that we can use for some base level planning. And so that would allow us to run a process to bring a consultant on board. We're expecting that VAX will have approximately $100,000 of funding, give or probably not take, probably not give, so probably somewhere between 85 and 100,000, right? And when we looked at this, we felt like the goal here was to really approach this in a regional way. And although Bangor and Orono are the 2 that are stepping up and willing to put some effort to push the process forward, we really felt like bringing VAX to the table as the Metropolitan Planning Agency made a lot of sense, because they'll be looking out for Milford, Bradley, Old Town, the island, if the Penobscot Nation so chooses, Bangor, Brewer, Orrington, Hamden, that pretty much it. What we have suggested in our RFP is a dual level of service. So for the money that VAX can provide, which wouldn't cost the other communities anything other than our normal assessment to VAX, which is usually a little over $2,000 for the town of Orono, we would get a base level of service. So a certain amount of data collection, a report back. And then if we wanted more service, we wanted folks to run community meetings or to run different analytics or to drill down in other ways, we would pay for that piece. It seemed to be the way of taking some places that weren't quite ready to jump on board with this and get at least the data that we would need for the regional effort. So we expect to post the RFP the first week of January, hold pre-bid meeting, get responses by the end of January, and responses to all questions, and then have the proposal back the second week of February 11th. So the way we are running this, it's actually VAX that makes the decision, but Bangor and Orono seem to have an awful lot of sway in that process. So in addition to that effort, as we discussed before, we have the state of Maine has issued some funding for municipal initiatives related to climate action planning. There's a 3-step process to be eligible for those funds. The first step is for us to do a assessment, a self-assessment of kind of where we are, what our issues are, what the priorities are. And then we have to hold a public meeting of some sort. I think a public hearing would work. And then the council needs to pass a resolution. You've already passed a climate action planning resolution. That might need to be adjusted and reissued, but that will take some action. Our environmental services coordinator has taken the lead on that assessment. We're going to do a dual track here to get it before council and the environment committee, probably council first and then the environment committee. I know it's backwards, but we want to meet a time. We want to have this in by the end of January so that once it's in, we would become eligible to apply for the grant. So we're kind of excited, and I will tell you what's really great is when I sat down and began to weed through the assessment and thought, oh my word, I don't have time to do this, but we desperately need to do this because this is a priority. And then I thought, oh, we have our new employee. Let's see what she can do. And she actually did an awful lot before she took a planned break. So I am pleased with where we are in this process. It's slow going, but Cheryl's got us on the right track, I think.
Good. Thank you. Any questions on that item?
Sophie, how does, and thank you for the update, because I've been really curious to see where we were. How does the University of Maine and Husson, how are they going to figure into this at all? Or will they?
Yep, no, they will. UMaine and Husson are going to join that steering committee that we had talked about when we formed our memorandum of understanding and formed the regional effort. I think the way we look at it is Husson is coming kind of under Bangor's umbrella, and UMaine is coming kind of under Orono's umbrella. Our goal is to have a meeting of the communities that have indicated interest, and right now that's Bradley and Beasley and maybe Hamden. I'm not sure about Hamden yet. And we would have Husson and UMaine come to the table because they are more than resident volunteer experts. They're pretty awesome when you think about what they can contribute.
Great, thanks, thank you.
Anything else on that? Then we will move on to proposed meeting schedule for the first quarter of 2022. And we have a proposed schedule in front of you, at least those of us here. Do our
Yes,
remote folks?
Nancy was going to email that to you. Has she not? Okay. So the schedule looks at this point like the exact same thing we have right now, which is the second Monday of every month, unless we have a holiday that would disrupt it, is council meeting. The rest of the Mondays are committee meetings, and the Wednesday, it looks like the third Wednesday of the month is the environment committee. When we looked at this, we did not see any special dates to plan around in the calendar. It looks like we don't start with any dates that you've already kind of alluded to wanting to plan around until the middle of April.
So the special council workshops in April, those are budget.
No,
Oh, no, that's right.
those are for our consultant
Yes.
that's gonna help with some council incorporation and then priority setting for the coming year.
Thank you.
I knew they're out of the quarter, but they're really important, so we want to make sure people can mark them off.
Any other questions on this item? Good. do you have anything to report to us tonight?
So I got to participate briefly in putting down the pop-up ice rink in the old Camden National parking lot. If you have a chance to look at it at night in a few days, because we need to get the electrical managed, I think. There will be if it's worked the way YouTube says, there should be a little surprise in the ice for you. If it doesn't work, forget I said anything. I will say that while the idea of a pop-up ice rink is a wonderful thing for the community, for me, watching my Parks and Rec staff and my Public Works staff and my fire department staff all working together to do something that benefits the community, it was just a really neat thing to be able to see. And just reminding folks that after Wednesday, I'm on vacation for a little over a week. Not planning to go anywhere. Gonna do lots of fun things. Maybe find something to clean or paint. I don't know. But if you need me, feel free. The plan at this point is to not meet on the 27th. And our next meeting will be on January 3rd. I need to kind of talk with Tom and committee chairs to see what we need for that meeting. And then the meeting on the 10th is a regular council meeting. I am anticipating a workshop for a councilor requested project for both folks to discuss.
Okay. Is there any further business for us tonight? I don't believe there is. Motion to adjourn. And I'm sure somebody seconded it.
Second.
And everybody's gonna wave.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a wonderful holiday, everybody.
Thank you all. Have a nice holiday.
Yep.